Thank you very much, Dolores, for the introduction. And as you have kindly pointed out, Sarah Morgan is the chair of the project team, which has been established with the member states, leading on the implementation also of the new pharmacovigilance legislation specifically dedicated to EudraVigilance and adverse reaction reporting. So we have prepared this presentation jointly, and we wanted to give you a little bit of an insight on the new developments. That means a lot of functionalities that need to be enhanced in EudraVigilance in order to make sure that we can comply with the provisions that are set out in the new legislation. But then most importantly, I think, and most interesting for you all, it will be how you will be able to work with EudraVigilance in the future. So as I said, the topics that we would like to address is first of all to give you a little bit of an update on the enhanced functionalities in the context of the new legislation, and then specifically focusing on how we envisage the implementation on providing access to adverse reaction data in the future, taking into account that we have different stakeholders in pharmacovigilance, and each of the stakeholders has, of course, also different expectations and also certain obligations to fulfill. So I start again with a quite important topic in, in EudraVigilance, which we have already mentioned during our first stakeholder meeting. One of the key enhancements that we foresee in EudraVigilance is that we are aiming for the next version, an implementation of two important new standards. One standard is referring to the electronic submission of individual case safety reports, which should help us really to improve the adverse reaction reporting, the quality of the reports, and also facilitate the analysis of the data. And secondly, another important standard, which I will come back to before the end of today's information session, is referring to standards that allow us for the unique identification of medicinal products. And this is one of the key aspects, of course, when we collect adverse reaction reports, because we have to clearly understand to which medicinal products a healthcare professional or a patient is referring to. So the other important aspect is that we have heard we have now different reporting possibilities in the community set up. And we have heard in the previous session about possibilities now for reporting by patients. We have already established reporting possibilities for healthcare professionals, specifically in relation to EudraVigilance. But what is new in the legislation, of course, is that there should be also an objective from the agency to support member states in developing electronic tools that will help patients, consumers, and healthcare professionals in reporting adverse reactions. We have already heard in the previous session that some member states have established very powerful tools in order to collect information from patients and healthcare professionals also in electronic format. But we have to look also at the other member states who have not yet implemented or developed such tools, and we have to start now a dialogue with those member states to see how we can also develop the necessary tools in order to help them in order to facilitate electronic patient reporting or healthcare professional reporting. What is important also to understand is, of course, that these reports will not be submitted directly to EudraVigilance, but these electronic tools are channeling information to the national competent authorities, and from there the information should be reported to EudraVigilance. Simplified reporting rules for marketing authorization holders. So through the new legislation, we have also changes on how marketing authorization holders will report to EudraVigilance. Again, the interaction between healthcare professionals, patients, consumers with a marketing authorization holder remain, but marketing authorization holders will in future channel not only reports from outside the European Union to EudraVigilance, vigilance, but also reports within the EU. So the obligation of companies to report to the national competent authority for cases that occur in a specific country in the EU will disappear. Instead, marketing authorization holders will have one single reporting point, and that will be EudraVigilance. And this is, as I said, for both cases that have been reported directly to them by healthcare professionals, patients, or consumers within the EU, but also from outside the European Union. What is, however, very important is that we keep, of course, member states fully informed about adverse reactions that have been brought initially to the attention of the marketing authorization holders. And that requires that we implement new functionalities which will help us to reroute all adverse reactions that have been submitted by marketing authorization holders and that occur in a specific country in the European Union to the national competent authority. So it's important that the national competent authority has full details of the adverse reactions that occur in their country, and therefore we have to implement in EudraVigilance functionalities and tools that will allow us in the future to channel reports that we have received from marketing authorization holders back to the country where the adverse reaction occurred. Another important aspect that I think is also important from public health protection perspective is that at the moment adverse reactions that occur in the different countries within the European Union are reported by the country to the WHO. In the future, this will also change. So EudraVigilance has to be programmed in a way that we will submit on a routine basis all adverse reactions that occur in the EU or in the EEA to the World Health Organization. So the obligation for member states to submit their reports to the WHO is lifted, and we will facilitate this reporting through EudraVigilance and make sure that the WHO is routinely informed about all the adverse reactions from the European or European Economic Area. We have also a collaboration foreseen through the new legislation, specifically with the European Monitoring Center for Drugs and Drug Addiction. And also here we have reporting obligations. That means we should provide regularly information on data that we receive in EudraVigilance resulting from abuse of medicines or of medicinal products. So again, this is very important because, as I said, the database is not only a data collection tool, but it is important that we can supply information to our different stakeholders. So before we can, of course, supply information to the stakeholders, it's very important that we establish procedures that make sure that the data that we are collecting of the system are of the highest possible quality. And here we have established tools where we have automatic validation based on a set of standard criteria. We have also implemented tools that facilitate duplicate detection. But again, here we have to work very closely with the member states and also with the marketing authorization holders, because we often do not receive, for instance, sufficient information on a patient or a healthcare professional to be sure if this is the same report or if this is a report from a different source. So here, strong collaboration between industry and the national competent authorities will be required. The coding of product information is a very important aspect. As I have already mentioned, you know that at European level we have at the moment no inventory of all medicinal products which are licensed in the European Union. So when we receive individual case safety reports from different countries, we have to make sure that in a system the product information is coded systematically and correctly in order then, if you want to do data analysis and signal detection, we can also provide reliable results. And the overall ICSR data quality, that means how you present the information, how you code medical information, for instance, using MEDRA and so on, is quite important because, again, for the national competent authorities who share responsibilities with the agency on the assessment and evaluation of the reports, it's important that we have adequate quality available. So as I mentioned, these quality aspects are very important for signal detection, for data analysis, but for you specifically, because once we move then forward with providing access to EudraVigilance data, also you need to be sure that you can rely on the data that we make available. The next point then is referring to signal detection and evaluation. You will see from the legislation that the continuous benefit risk assessment of the medicinal products is a very important aspect. And here, of course, we need to make sure that in EudraVigilance we can provide the adequate tools in order to perform signal detection and data analysis. Now, the methods how you assess or detect signals can be quite differently applied, and also member states have different methods implemented in their current systems. So one of the challenges that we face, of course, is to have methods implemented in EudraVigilance that are broadly accepted by the colleagues of the member states, but also taking into account that with the new legislation, also companies will have access to the database and should have also access to the signal detection tools in order to assess and evaluate the data that we have collected. And here again, also we have talked before about different types of adverse reactions that we are, or reports that we are now collecting. We have at the moment in EudraVigilance mainly spontaneous reports, which are medically confirmed by healthcare professionals. With the new legislation, we will be widening this data set to reports from patients and consumers. And again, here we need to look from a signal detection perspective. Do we want to apply different methods? Do we want to look at the data sets differently? So these are important aspects that need to be considered very carefully and then implemented in the system accordingly. So then the most important or most interesting aspect, I think, which was highlighted for today's discussion is, of course, the access to the data which we hold in EudraVigilance. And here, as you know, we have already provided full access to all the adverse reaction data we hold in the system, to all the national competent authorities, to the European Commission, and of course, we as the agency have also access to this data. Now, the major step forward, and this is certainly a quite challenging aspect for us, is now on how we want to implement access to data held in EudraVigilance to patients, consumers, but also to healthcare professionals. And here it was already mentioned, we have been working under the old legal framework on an access policy. This access policy was adopted at the end of last year by the EMA Management Board. And here we are looking into a phased implementation approach, where we would like to start, first of all, with an implementation of this access policy focusing on centrally authorized medicinal products, and then step by step increasing the access to this data for other types of products which are licensed in the EU. The initial focus will be on spontaneous reports, so reports which are spontaneously reported through the various reporting schemes established in the member states, which are allowing healthcare professionals and patients and consumers to submit their observations. The key aspect when we implement these access policies, of course, that we have to ensure that we comply with personal data protection in the legislation. So, of course, when we make data available, we have to make sure that we do not disclose any personal information and where the issue becomes a little bit more complex is there is also in the legislation provision that the person should not be identifiable, which is sometimes quite challenging because, again, based on the information that is available in the report, you have to carefully assess to which extent an individual might be identifiable or not. Our vision, our technical vision is, of course, there are different ways to implement access to data, specifically in relation to adverse reactions, and we have seen also in the previous session various examples. Again, we will be looking into a phased approach. What the aim is, of course, is that patients, consumers, healthcare professionals will have the possibility to query based on a product name or a combination of active ingredients, for instance, and to be able to retrieve then a set of adverse reaction data. The way how we want to display it, this is something that we are still discussing and assessing. So this is just an illustration, for instance, on how we use data that we have collected. And one of the very interesting reports that we have prepared last year on a routine basis was relation to the H1N1 influenza vaccines. And I think this was very well received from patients, but also from healthcare professionals, because we have really tried to give on a monthly basis an overview of the reports that have been received, what observations have been made based on the reports that were collected. And I think this is an illustration for us, based also the feedback that we have received on how we could implement the access policy in the future in a useful and also in a helpful manner. Then the second aspect, which is a new aspect in the legislation, is that we should also provide access for marketing authorization holders to data held in EudraVigilance. I have shown you the new reporting rules that will be implemented through the new legislation. And one of the key aspects is that the marketing authorization holders in future will no longer receive reports from national competent authorities, for instance, that have been submitted by healthcare professional or patients to the authority, but instead companies will access EudraVigilance directly and should have then the possibility to retrieve reports from the system and also to use the data for their pharmacovigilance purposes. So again, here, what we have foreseen in the access policy, in the initial implementation, is that we would focus on the data sets again for spontaneous reports. Again, personal data protection has to be fully adhered to, and from a technical perspective, ideally, but we have to assess the feasibility on that, is that we would like to give companies access to the what we call data warehouse system. So it's a specific component of the EudraVigilance system which we use for data analysis and signal detection. Of course, for the companies, it's important that they have also possibilities to export reports and also to store or save or export results based on the signal detection activities that they have conducted. And as I said, this is something that we are currently investigating also from a technical perspective, but we are fully aware of the needs of the pharmaceutical companies, and we will try to accommodate that to the best extent possible. The last aspect then in the new legislation is referring also to access to data held in EudraVigilance for research organizations. Of course, we have a lot of data. We currently have 4.2 million reports in the system, and this is a quite valuable information set that, of course, would be good to make it accessible for research purposes. And again, here in the access policy, we have foreseen provisions where we would like to open the system in order to make this data set available for access for research purposes. We have made a proposal that we will set up specifically an internal ad hoc committee where we would like to request or review the requests that have been submitted for research purposes. And again, the data that we would make available is focusing specifically again on data for spontaneous reports, adhering with the personal data protection. And from the technologies and tools, we will look into various options. Initially, we will make data sets available to research organizations, and in the future, as I said, depending on the technical feasibility, we may even give access to the data warehouse again based on a subset of data. So this is a very brief overview just for you to give you an introduction in the areas or of the areas that we are currently further investigating and working very hard in order to develop a system that can meet the future expectations. And I don't know, Sarah, perhaps if you would like to add something in addition, or we take the questions immediately. Thank you.
Just two very brief points, really from the point of view of a national regulatory authority. Clearly, with the new requirement in the legislation for all member states to monitor the EudraVigilance database for new signals, we will need to ensure that not only the data quality in EudraVigilance is as excellent as it can be, but there will need to be very good coordination and signal management across the EU network and communication with industry in relation to signals that are identified. The other thing that we're thinking about a lot at the moment are the transitional measures, what we will have in place between July 2012 and the fully functional EudraVigilance database, where the single reporting from marketing authorization holders will take over. So those are the 2 points that I wanted to make, particularly from the National Competent Authority point of view.
Thanks very much, Sabine and Sarah. So now I think we leave the floor open for any question you may have in this area. Yes, please go on.
Thank you. My name is Matthias Seck. I'm with BPI, the German Pharmaceutical Industry Association. It has been stressed that the need for cooperation in this regard to ensure the best possible quality in the EudraVigilance system. And given that the amount of actors who will be involved in the process, is it right to assume that the EMA would have some sort of safeguard in place to ensure that some sort of review, so that we do not have an increase in quantity of data without the respective quality of data which is available before it is actually put online? Thank you.
Yes, no, I think this is a very valid question. So we have been thinking of that, of course, proactively, and taking into account the large number of reports we are receiving. We are receiving on an average 85,000 reports per month at the moment. Of course, this cannot be done by ourselves, but we have gone last year for a call for tender in order to establish a contract with a third party, a service provider, who works together with us on a clear set of defined criteria, where we have, as I said, a process to monitor potential duplicates, or to screen the system for potential duplicates, and then also to merge potential or merge confirmed duplicates, so in order to make sure that there are no duplicates in the system. And we have also established, as I said, a set of criteria where reports will be routinely reviewed on their overall data quality. What we are still in a process of discussing also at the level of the HMA is then how we would like to communicate, for instance, observations that we make on the quality of reports. How do we provide feedback to the different stakeholders who are providing information to the system? So this is also something that we have taken into account. But as I said, this has been formally established, so we have a process in place. And also to explain to you, we have looked at that from two perspectives. So we have a specific work stream which looks at the data quality retrospectively. So all the data that we have already collected in the system, and also the data that we receive prospectively, so to apply consistently this criteria across the whole database.
Thanks very much, Sabine. I think that's very important that you refer to quality. I mean, because it's not only to comply with the deadlines, but to send data of quality for our purpose. Please, Mary.
Thank you very much, Barry Arnold. I guess the obvious question is when. That was very much missing from your presentation. So when will the various stakeholders have access, as you indicate?
Well, we have been presenting an implementation plan for EudraVigilance specifically to the EMA Management Board in March, because of course there is a lot of deliverables that have to be taken care of. Of course, we have to also consider the budget that is made available to us for the implementation of the new legislation, and EudraVigilance is only one information management system in this context. But our vision is that we will, as I said, definitely look into the first implementation for making data for centrally authorized products available specifically for the public. And this maybe we will achieve already beginning of next year. And then we will do it in a phased approach. I mean, that was the plan that we have presented to the management board, so that by 2014, where we also envisaged that the audit should take place on EudraVigilance to make sure that all the functionalities are there to support the new pharmacovigilance legislation, the access policy would be also fully implemented. But as I said, I have to make here also the remark that we depend also on the necessary funding, but this was based on the assumption of the funds that were available in March.
But that has some practical implications, because what I'm hearing from you is for non-centralized products that marketing authorization holders are not necessarily going to have access to individual case reports on the non-centralized products, and yet the competent authorities can stop sending us those reports from July 2012.
No, Barry, sorry, that I do apologize. Maybe I was not quite clear on that. We will start for making data publicly accessible with centrally authorized products. And the reason why we focus first on centrally authorized products is because for centrally authorized products, we have the full product information in-house. So when we publish data, we can code the reports that we have received against the information on centrally authorized products. So this is reliable data on which the public can search on. The problem is more difficult for us when we have to code MRP products or other nationally authorized products. And we will have another presentation before we finish today, which will focus on the implementation of the electronic submission of product information by companies, which is running in parallel now also again with the implementation of the new legislation. And as soon as we have our repository well established with all the product information which are non-centrally authorized products, we will substantially then, of course, increase also the access on the level of these products. However, in any case, as soon as we have the access policy implemented and the new reporting rules become effective in the new legislation, companies will have access to EudraVigilance data, and the access will be initially granted on the active ingredient. So that's absolutely accommodated.
Yes, the legislation provides a transitional period for this, so it will be once it's fully agreed by everyone that EudraVigilance is functional, that the new procedures for sending reports will start. Yes, please.
Yes, over the Molla agenda. Is there already at this moment any consideration given to potentially kind of notification of MEH when, for instance, an existing report that was maybe originally reported by the MEH, but then there is follow-up received by an authority via a source, that there is some kind of notification that there is follow-up on that existing reports to the MEH?
Well, these are technical functionalities that we need to further look at. I mean, you will have definitely the possibility to create different reports. So on a set of criteria, so either, for instance, at the level of the active substance, or you have a specific worldwide unique identification of the case for which you want to be notified when new information is received. So there are different functionalities that can be implemented, and we are looking into that. But as I said, we have to also consider the financial constraints under which we have to operate. But I think we can say we are fully aware that this is a functionality that the companies are definitely interested in.
Thank you, Sabine. One last question, please.
Sabine, I was wondering if you could please clarify regarding the access to the various stakeholders to the signal generation tools. Were you saying that the stakeholders would be actually able to utilize the methodology and the tools that the agencies is using to do the signal generation on the data set that the stakeholders have access to, or was it something else?
Well, as I said, there are three different types of stakeholders. So we, of course, we will try for patients, healthcare professionals, and consumers to provide the information in a more static way in form of different reports, or in the form that they can perform simple queries. We will not provide to them signal detection tools as such, because it might not be really helpful to them. However, for the companies where there is a specific obligation in the new legislation where it's stated that the companies should have access to the extent necessary for them to comply with their pharmacovigilance obligations, we have considered this option. So again, as I said, we are assessing at the moment the technical feasibility. Ideally, that was our vision. We have to see if it's technically feasible, but that would be ideally the vision that we have planned for.